Good morning. So good to be here. You know, in 1956, Lorin Cunningham had a vision while he was praying. In that vision, what he saw was the map of the world. In this vision, he noticed that the map was not static, but alive. He noticed that the waves in the ocean was moving, and particularly the waves of the ocean was crashing against the shoreline of every continent. It crashed, and then it retreats. It receded back to the ocean. It crashed again, going further and deeper into the nation, and then it receded again. While this was all taking place, Lorin can't help but notice that the waves crashing against the shoreline was not water. It was people, young men and young women entering the nations, preaching the gospel, reaching the lost, caring and loving the sick and the poor. It's at this moment, Lorin couldn't help but to summarize what he saw with this statement. He says this: they came from everywhere and they went everywhere. The young people, everybody going into the nations, everybody going everywhere. It is from this vision, Lorin Cunningham later founded the missions organizations that we know today as Youth with a Mission, often described as just YWAM. It's at the time when he founded this missions organization, he began to declutter missions. Missions at the time was only reserved for the few, for the selected to be sent to another country or to another culture. But based on the vision that Lorin received from God, he felt that all should go. Everybody should go to the nations, and hence many went. Millions went into the nations. In fact, YWAM lost count how many people went to the nation, of which the last time they counted was in 2010, of which they sent out 4.5 million people just from YWAM. You know, it's based on this that YWAM was credited that they are one of the largest Christian mission movement to date. And all this started off from a vision that Lorin received from God. You know, God has often used visions and dreams, encounters like these, to communicate His heart and agenda for missions. Let me give you another example, this time from Acts chapter 16. The Apostle Paul was on his second missionary journey, and this time when he was preaching, planting churches, ministering in the region of Turkey, in the continent of Asia, when he was at Troas, God gave him a vision. Of which a vision of a man calling him to enter into Macedonia. Upon receiving that vision, the Apostle Paul bought the boat, crossed the Aegean Sea, and reached Macedonia. And that's how the gospel moved from Turkey to Greece, from Asia to Europe. See, God has often used encounters like this, visions and dreams, to communicate His heart and agenda for missions. You know, out of the many visions and dreams that God has used, there's one vision that stands distinct above the rest. There's one that's so important that's repeated over the pulpit again and again and again. In fact, songs have been written about this vision. And that vision is none other than Isaiah's throne room vision in Isaiah chapter 6. Our text today from verse 1 to verse 8. In this vision, we see the angels cry out, "Holy, holy, holy." Never before in Scripture is God described in such a way. Holy, 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 serving as His core and most evident description of who He is. More importantly, the recipient of this vision respond with the word Hineni. Here I am, adding two words, sent me, which is Otto or Hineni, the theme of our missional living series, which is a response of surrenderedness, a response of availability, a response of faithful obedience. And each time someone in the Bible responds Hineni, is out of an encounter with God. Specifically, if I could categorize the different type of encounter, it's an encounter with the covenantal God, encounter with the holy God, encounter with the powerful God, and encounter with the worthy God. Of which today we are going to cover the encounter with the holy God, moving away from the last 2 weeks, an encounter with a covenantal God. And hence the topic of this 2 week sermon, this week and next week, is from His holiness to our hunger, of which this week I'm going to focus from His holiness. So without further ado, let's jump straight into the text of Isaiah chapter 6 verse 1. And it begins with this: in the year that King Uzziah died. This is the context of which the vision is based on. A vision of which starts upon the death of a king. Here, King Uzziah has passed away. It's worth noting that King Uzziah is one of the rare and faithful, feel-good kings in the land of Israel. Or because of his faithfulness, God blessed Israel with territorial expansion, economic growth, military achievement and success. However, at the end of his life, King Uzziah fell into sin. Pride took the better of him as he marched into the temple of God and did things his own way in the presence of God. And because of that, God struck him down with leprosy, ending his rule and reign as king. You know, whenever a leader, or perhaps a Christian leader, falls into a sin, I think there's waves of sadness and discouragement that will enter the community, the church itself. Perhaps we'll even be in a state of disillusionment, asking ourselves, could he really have said this? Could have done this or that? You know, I could think of modern day's example of King Uzziah. Take, for example, Ravi Zachariah, a world-renowned evangelist, was found to have sexual misconduct with multiple women. Brian Houston, the founder of the global Christian music movement Hillsongs, had inappropriate behaviors with 2 women. Robert Morris, the founder of Gateway Church in the United States, a big church, had illicit act with a child. And most recently, just weeks ago, Philip Yancey, the famous Christian author, confessed to having an affair with a married woman for the last 8 years. When news of such gets surfaced, the entire Christendom, the entire church as a whole, feels saddened, feels discouraged. And perhaps we will be disillusioned as we ask, how could they have done it? They were faithful servants of God. And it's in this context of sadness, discouragement, and disillusionment that this Isaiah throne room vision is based on. For the very next line, Isaiah looks up and he says, well, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lifted up, as if the death of a king, sadness, discouragement, disillusionment doesn't change the rule of the king above. He remains unchanged, unfazed, unmoved. He's reigning supreme and, more importantly, in control. That's the response to the context of discouragement, sadness, and disillusionment. In this context, as he's absorbing this visual picture, Isaiah couldn't help but to notice other details as he looks at God himself. He looks to the ground and says, oh, the train of his robe filled the temple. You see, the train of the robe in those days for a king represents his prestige, his prominence. And in this case, his prestige and prominence is filling the entire scene. The entire temple, the entire throne scene is filled with his prominence and prestige. Beyond looking down, Isaiah then looks up and he noticed creatures. I put here 2 creatures. Specifically, there it says, above it stood seraphim. Never in the Bible described such a creature like this before. In Hebrew, the word seraphim is just fiery one. And it says here, each one has 6 wings. With 2, he covered his face. With 2, he covered his feet. And with 2, he flew. 2 to cover the face, perhaps in God's glorious, magnificent presence, it needs to be shielded. The feet being one of the dirtiest part of the body, it needs to be covered. And the remaining 2, he used it to fly. As Isaiah was describing this visual scene, it wasn't just visual that he wrote down and noted down, but also an audio description of what comes next as the seraphim declares to each other, saying, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. What a magnificent proclamation. An unforgettable audio description that Isaiah couldn't help but take note. You know, in Hebrew, when you repeat the word twice, in this case, holy, holy, it reflects fullness and completeness. So when you see Isaiah 26 says, peace, peace, it gets translated perfect peace. Or when Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, it reflects importance. But when it's used 3 times, when a word is repeated 3 times, it's seen used as in a superlative sense, where it's utmost fullness, utmost completeness, utmost importance. And this word to describe God, used in a superlative sense, utmost important, utmost completeness, utmost important, is the word holy. In Hebrew, you get the word qadosh, which gives you the understanding of separation. Something, and in this case, someone is being set apart. So to define and to call God holy, to say that He is holy is to say that He is set apart from two key perspectives. The first is that He's set apart from creation. He is outside of the creation order. He is transcendent, outside of creation itself. He is eternal, so to the point that He exists before time itself, and most certainly He will continue to exist when creation ends. He is all-knowing. He knows everything in our mind, in our hearts, and everything in the universe. And more importantly, He is all-powerful. Just by the words of His mouth, creation comes into existence. So that's the first understanding, first perspective when we say God is holy, He is set apart from creation. The next perspective is that He is set apart morally, where He's perfectly moral, where He's perfectly loving, perfectly merciful, perfectly gracious. He is the source of goodness Himself, and most certainly, He is the righteous one. He determines what's right and what's wrong, and hence, He is righteous. So every time when we sing the song, holy forever, or anything that describes God as holy, it gives off the idea of separation, where the holy God, He is separated, He's set apart from creation, and is set apart morally. This is in a sense, the breakdown, the technical understanding when we call God holy. It is an important understanding. This is so important that Lee Sobel, the author of the book Case for Christ and the former investigative journalist, based on this understanding, couldn't help but to reflect upon reflection of it, came to this understanding as well. You know what? In 2003, Lee Sobel noted that Alexandra Valenkin, the professor of evolutionary science and director of Institute of Cosmology from Tufts University, made a groundbreaking, earth-shaking discovery in the field of science. He has mathematically proven that the ever-expanding universe that we live in right now has a beginning, has a cosmic beginning. This universe that we live in is ever-expanding, but it all starts somewhere. There is a beginning to all of creation. And this is his full quote. He says this: with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no such thing as a past eternal universe. In this eternal, ever-expanding universe, there is a beginning. He says here, there is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. If you were to ask yourself this question, as many people would ask, if there is a beginning, what caused this beginning? Who can cause such a cosmic beginning? That person has to be transcendent. He must be existing outside of creation to create creation. He must be eternal, outside of time itself to create time. He must be all-knowing to cause such a creative order, to start such a cosmic beginning, of which we result of where we are today. He must be all-powerful to create, to start, to trigger something that result to what we have today. And more importantly, that person has to be loving, has to be kind, gracious, merciful, to create an environment of which we are all thriving in. And the principle of Occam razor will suggest there is only one cause, one trigger, and one person behind this cosmic beginning, and all that points to the holy God, to the God of the Bible, to the Christian God. And now, I wonder if this means anything to you today. But if you are seated here, watching online, looking at life, looking at all of the universe, all of creation, and wondering to yourself, is there someone behind it all? Is there a God who made it all? And if there is a God, which God? If that is on your mind, let me quote you the first line of Alexandra Valenkin. He said, with the proof now in place, there is a cosmic beginning, and all the evidence will point to the holy God who is the one triggering this cosmic beginning, cosmic event. He is the only one in creation, only one in history, only one in all of mankind to claim not just one, but all of these attributes. So if you're here listening online, wondering yourself, is there a God? Could there be a God? Which God? When you come to realize that it is this God, the holy God who made the universe. He made all things. He made you. And He loves you. When you come to that that understanding of which the scientific community can't help but also arrive at. I understand all that I've described thus far can be fairly complex. I encourage you to explore the claims of Lee Sobel, explore the claim of Alexandra Valenkin. But more importantly, if you'd like to speak to someone, to have someone journey with you, please do come to the front later. Speak to any of the staff, the pastors or elder. We would love to connect with you. But more importantly, at the end of the day, my prayer is that you recognize that He, the holy God, the maker of heaven and earth, who made the universe, made you, loves you, and desire for you to respond to Him. Will you consider responding to Him? Will you consider accepting Him as your God? This church, we have now arrived at the first point of the sermon, and that is the understanding, the definition of holiness, what it means to describe God as holy. It's in the next scene, what's interesting is that when we encounter a God who is holy, there is and will be an inevitable response. First, we see nature responding. It says, the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of Him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. Nature can't help but respond. You know, we were told by experts that the strongest part of the household is the doorpost, right? The door frame. If there's an earthquake, you go to it and hug it and stay under it. But you know what? Even the doorpost here, it is shaking. Next, we see some kind of smoke, some kind of movement of fire, mist, or whatsoever. You know, nature can't help but react in such a way. In fact, another example of nature responding in such similar fashion, we see it in Exodus 19, when God descended on Mount Sinai. Next chapter, He gave the 10th commandment. Nature, the mountain itself, shake and tremble. Fire, smoke was filling the entire scene. Nature can't help but to also respond and react to a holy God. And the next scene we see here is not just nature responding, but men responding. Specifically, Isaiah responding. The first words out of his mouth upon encountering a holy God was, "Woe is me." You know, this is the oracle words for curse. So he's trying to say, curse is me. And you know, if I could use vulgarities over the pulpit, it would be me. He is cursing himself. Who does that? So strange, right? But what's interesting is the very next line he's quoted. He says, "I am undone," which suggests some form of disintegration within him. Something within him is moving, churning, ripping apart to the point that it says, "I am undone." Something psychologically, spiritually, physiologically, maybe even is moving within him for him to utter the words, "I am undone." Then the third phrase he uttered was, "I am a man of unclean lips, for I dwell with a people with unclean lips." You know, this is really odd for a prophet to say it. After all, the words that exit his mouth as a prophet is literally the words that God gave him. And yet, he says, "My words, my lips are unclean." You see, the reason why he uttered those words is not because he's comparing himself with his friends, his peers. He's comparing himself with the one who is seated opposite him, the righteous and holy one. And when we compare ourselves with the righteous and holy one, we fail in comparison. Isaiah 64 makes it clear. Our righteousness in comparison to him is like filthy rags. So from this three response, woe is me, curse is me, I am done, there's some form of disintegration, I'm a man of unclean lip, a sinner, unrighteous. You know, this response is not uncommon. It's not new. All throughout the Bible, whenever someone encounters the holy God, such responses is also reflected. Let me give you an example. Take Ezekiel, for example. When he encountered God, he fell flat on the ground, face plump. Next, Job, When he encountered God, he took dust and ashes and he began to despise himself, curse himself. John, when he encountered God, he fell down as if he was dead, as if he fainted. Peter raised his hand on his knees, tell Jesus, go away, I am unrighteous, I am a sinner, stay far from me. Peter, James, and John, when he encountered Jesus at the Transfiguration, when Jesus calmed the storm, they were shaken. They were terrified. It's based on these patterns of response, man's response with a holy God, that the R.C. Sproul, the Reformed theologian, summarizes these effects as the trauma of holiness. When you encounter the holy God, you will be traumatized. You'll be shaken. You say, woe is me, I am undone. In this posture of trauma, Rudolf Otto describes this experience in which you experience three things. You experience his awe, you experience his terror, and you experience his majesty. And this, as he describes, is a crucial Christian experience of which all of us are called to encounter. Encountering the holiness of God. Be traumatized by him. Be experiencing the awe, the terror, the majesty. I like the way how A.W. Tozer summarizes this effect. He summarizes it with just one word. It is, oh, in God's presence. In the presence of his holiness, the possible word that can ever exit your mouth is just, oh. Experiencing his awe, his terror, his majesty. Traumatized by his holiness. On 15 March 1959, George Palmer was then a vicious and violent gangster, specifically a gang leader. It's on that day he arranged for 9 of his gang members, accomplices, to be armed with pistols placed under their jacket and would arrange and orchestrate the assassination of Billy Graham, the evangelist. On 15 March 1959, Billy Graham was in Melbourne, Australia, and he was preaching at this stadium, Melbourne Cricket Stadium. 143,000 people was gathered at this stadium to listen to Billy Graham preach, and more importantly, respond to the call to accept Jesus as Lord. While all this was taking place, 10 of them, including George Palmer, armed with handgun, seated at the ground of the Melbourne Cricket Stadium so they have quick access, near access to Billy Graham when Billy Graham calls for the altar call, and hence they will be at the front, and when in the front, they will pull out their gun, point it at Billy Graham at almost point-blank range, squeeze the trigger, and take the life of the evangelist, Billy Graham. While George Palmer was waiting for the altar call, with his pistol in his jacket, he began to look around at everybody in this stadium. 143,000 people. He began wondering himself, what are these idiots doing here? They're wasting their time. What on earth are they here for? In his own words, he used the word, Dickens, they're idiots. As this thought was still on his mind, a voice spoke up to him. What are you doing here, George? George immediately turned around, looked to his left, to his right, his behind. Perhaps someone has identified him. He looked and just couldn't find someone who had spoken those words to him. Everybody's eyes and attention was glued onto Billy Graham. So after a while, George thought to himself, oh, maybe I misheard. So he went to look forward again. It's at this moment, the voice spoke once more. What are you doing here, George? Again, he looked left, right, front, back, center, couldn't identify who would have spoken those words. And once again, he thought to himself, oh yeah, maybe I misheard once again. And then, for the third time, the voice spoke. What are you doing here, George? This time, George did not look left, to his right, front, or back. He immediately knew who was speaking to him. And that is God himself. George began to build up anger and rage and bitterness as he responded to God. God, I know it's you. You took my dad. You hurt me. Why should I care about you? Why should I love you? bitterness and rage was fuming within him. You see, when George was 7 years old, his dad died from a heart attack. And since then, bitterness and rage consumed him, blazing all that bitterness and anger towards God, even to the point of arranging for the assassination of Billy Graham. While this anger, this bitterness was raging up in him, God spoke. He said, George, I didn't take your dad to hurt you or your mom. I took your dad because he was a very sick man. And then God added, I would never hurt you. Full stop. Upon those words, George began to cry and tear and weep. All the bitterness, all the rage, all the anger that's within him beginning to undo itself, be stripped away, melt. All that was being pulled apart. He's experiencing God's holiness in which he undoes him completely. And when Billy Graham gave the altar call, George took his gun out, placed it on the ground, ran forward, and gave his life to Christ. Out of the 10 of them, 9 of them took their gun out, placed it on the ground, ran forward, and gave their life to Christ. The last one took his gun out, placed it on the ground, and ran away. Church, when we encounter the living God, when we encounter the holy God, we experience His awe, His terror, His majesty. In that moment, we get traumatized. According to George's words, when he realized that God was the one speaking to him, he immediately felt uncomfortable. And more importantly, in the presence of the Holy God, we become undone. All the bitterness, all the rage gets put away. Church, have you encountered the Holy God? Have you been undone before Him? Have you experienced the awe, the terror, the majesty? Have you experienced that moment? According to Rudolf, Otto, which I completely agree, this is a fundamental Christian experience. All believers need to encounter the Holy God. So church, have you encountered the Holy God? Be undone before Him. Experience that moment. You know, John Calvin said this, we walk blindfold in this glorious theater. In this world, in this awe of life, this glory and His holiness is just all over the place, but for some reason, we are blindfolded to it. We mask our eyes, covering it from His glory and holiness. And hence my prayer, and I pray it will be your prayer, that you ask God to remove this blindfold, that you may encounter God's glory and holiness, experience His awe, His terror, His majesty, be undone before Him, and just say, if that's your prayer, will you desire an encounter with the Holy God? Experience His terror, His awe, His majesty, be undone before Him. And especially if you have deep-rooted sins that just refuse to move, sin of pride, unforgiveness, bitterness, in the presence of God, all that gets undone. Will you desire an encounter with the Holy God? My prayer is that you yourself will spend time this week. You yourself will pray for God to remove this blindfold, that you may encounter the Holy God. Be undone. Experience His awe, His terror, His majesty. And hence, church, we arrive at our second point of the sermon. And that's the understanding the effects of encountering a holy God, often described as the trauma of holiness. Is that this part of the vision, we can't help but notice there is movement. Suddenly, the seraphim moved. And it says here, then one of the seraphims flew to me, Isaiah here, having in his hand a live coal, which he has taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth with it, and which he said the following, behold, this has touched your lips. Your iniquity has taken away, your sin is purged. What we are witnessing here is the work of expiation, often described as the work of atonement. Often we see this in the Old Testament through the work of the temple. Animals get sacrificed and altar is present. In the New Testament, we see it through the work of the cross, where Jesus, the Son of God, sent from heaven, died on the cross, purchased our sin, redeemed us, and reconciled us back to God. And whether it's New Testament or Old Testament, this work of expiation, work of atonement, it is divine initiated redemption. Only God can orchestrate such a moment, of which the effects of it is that our iniquities, our sin, our unrighteousness is taken away, and our sin is purified, purged, and removed. And we are then deemed as righteous before God. This is the work of expiation. This is the picture of redemption that we are seeing here in this scene. And it's only after this work of expiation, work of atonement, that we finally also hear the voice of God finally speaking after all this time. And here he says, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Immediately after these words, Isaiah, the recipient of this vision, responded, says, "Here I am, send me." You know, if I could dissect this conversation a little bit, I can't help but to notice the question presented by God, which is two questions here. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? This question has no details, no context, no content whatsoever. There's no what, no how, no why, no where. Go also must say where, right? Nowhere. Can you imagine if your boss speaks these words to himself? Whom shall I send? Whom will go for the company? And you listening to it say, "Oh, send me, send me, send me." Remember, no context, no content, no details, no what, no where, no how, no why. Would you say yes? I think if you say yes, I would say you are courageous, or foolishly courageous, if I could phrase it this way. You know, continuing the story of George Palmer, on 15 March 1959, after attempting to kill Billy Graham, after encountering the Holy God, and after receiving Christ as his Lord and Savior, on his way home, just exiting the subway, the voice that spoke to him in the stadium spoke to him for the second time. And this time, God said to George, "I want you to do two things. The first thing, I want you to be a Salvation Army officer." Of which George responded, "What is a Salvation Army officer? What's this? Okay, you ask for me, I will do it." Indeed, weeks later, he joined a Salvation Army church and became a Salvation Army officer. During that day, during the conversation, God said, "I want you to do one more thing. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to go down tomorrow to this person's place. This person is the leader of his enemy's gang, of which he has violently induced hurt upon that person." When George heard this request, George responded immediately, telling God, "If I go down tomorrow, I'm not sure if I'll come out alive. But because you asked of me, I will go." The very next day, George appeared in this person's house, and this person was shocked, ready to engage in battle. But George spoke, "I'm sent here because God told me to come. Yesterday, I almost took the life of Billy Graham. Yesterday, I encountered the Holy God. Yesterday, I gave my life to Christ. And he asked me to come here." And beyond just sharing that, he also shared the gospel. At the end of that conversation, the leader of his enemy's gang came to faith, received Christ as Lord and Savior, becoming his first convert as a Salvation Army officer, of which he served for the next 30 over years. See, George Palmer said yes to God, not knowing what a Salvation Army is. He said yes to God, not knowing what the outcome of visiting the leaders of his enemy's gang, but he still said yes. Isaiah said yes, said, "Here am I, send me," not knowing the details of the request that God is making of him. No what, no why, no how, no where. And he still said yes to God. You know, in 2014, it was the year that I just graduated from university. I graduated with a degree of accounting and finance. And after graduation, I began sending out resume, going for interviews, just applying for jobs. While all this was taking place, my pastor came to me and said, "Daniel, will you come on board as an intern?" I said, "Yeah, sure." you know what? That internship changed the course of my life. Specifically, 1 week during an internship changed the course of my life. During that particular week, I can't help but notice every day my daily devotion, though it's a different text, will arrive at the same conclusion, same application point, and that is to say yes to God. From Monday to Friday, different text, yet the application and the conclusion was always the same. Say yes to God. By Thursday, I got to admit, I was scratching my head. God, what are you asking me to say yes to? And back the head of my mind, I was thinking, I just applied to this company. This job is lucrative, good pay, good outcome, good prospect. Oh God, if you ask me to say yes to it, most certainly. But when Friday came, the same devotion, different text, same conclusion, say yes to God. Immediately after my devotion, my pastor came in and said, Daniel, this is a letter of invitation into ministry. Will you prayerfully consider? It's at that moment I knew exactly what was God asking me to say yes to. Immediately my pastor left, I went back to my table, flipped through my devotional booklet, Monday to Friday, yes to God, yes to God, yes to God, yes to God. And my response then, I said to him, how can I say no? You have been asking me to say yes from Monday to Friday. And I said to him, today I say yes to you again. Yes, I will serve you. Then that's how I entered into ministry. You see, from Monday to Friday, I said yes to God without any detail, without any context, without any content. No what, no why, no how, no where. But I still said yes to God solely because it is whom that calls of me. Same thing for George Palmer. He obeyed not knowing what the Salvation Army is about, officers about. He obeyed not knowing whether he'll come out of the meeting with the leader of his enemy's gang alive. And even for Isaiah, he said, yes, here am I, send me, not because of any detail, but solely because of whom is the one calling of him. Church, is God asking you to say yes to him today? Especially when he has not revealed the details of that call. Is he calling you to say yes to him when there's no what, no why, no how, no where? Will you still say yes? You know, this entire missional living series slowly reveals examples of how the community have been living missionally for God. Some has gone on a mission trip, some has sponsored students, some has served across the street in Bidadari, some has served with a community arm, BCCS, some has organized evangelistic outreaches, reaching the elderly, reaching the Chinese community, some has reached the homeless, the disregarded people. My prayer is when you listen to such example, you'll be attentive to God, in him who calls you to live missionally for him. May he be inviting you, but more importantly, calling you to live missionally for him. And when he calls you, when he asks you to say yes, especially when he has not revealed any detail, will you say yes to him? Yes to God's call to live missionally, especially when there's no details whatsoever. For it's not about the what, not about the why, not about the how, not about the where, but just based on who is the one calling and asking you to say yes to. Will you say yes to God today? Church, today we have covered much. From the vision, the throne room vision of Isaiah, we covered the definition, the understanding of the meaning of holiness. We have covered the effects of encountering the Holy One, of which we will be traumatized in awe, in terror, in majesty. When we respond to the holiness of God, we say yes, even when there's no details. So as we come to the end of this service, to the end of this sermon, my prayer is that you won't just listen, but you'll reflect and respond on what you heard. specifically in regards to the understanding of a holy God, on which He is set apart from all creation. He is set apart morally, perfectly loving, perfectly holy, of which He is the only one in all of creation to bear these characteristics of holiness, of which is the cause behind the cosmic beginning. And if you are wondering, is there someone beyond this? May you come to realize that the holy God is the creator of heaven and earth. He made everything, He made you, and He loves you. And will you respond to Him? Will you respond by accepting Him as a God? In regards to understanding the effects of the holiness of God, may we respond by saying, we desire to encounter the holy God. We want that blindfold will be stripped away to experience His awe, His terror, His majesty, and just be undone before Him. Will you desire an encounter with the holy God? And more important, in response to the holiness, will you say yes to Him? Especially when no details have been revealed. No what, no why, no how, no where. Just because whom is the one that's asking of you. Will you say yes? So as we sing this song of response, may you reflect, and more importantly, will you respond today? In the presence of the holy God, even nature can't help but response. Will you respond to Him, accepting Him as your God, desiring an encounter with Him, to have this blindfold removed, desiring to say yes even when there are no details to the call? Will you respond to a holy God today? Let us reflect and let us respond through this song.